This episode is proudly supported by East Coast Beverages.
So my name's Samuel James Lentini. Really what's special about East Coast Beverages and about what we do is that we are vertically integrated. We grow, we squeeze, we bottle, we blend everything here on site. And not only that, I think what is really special is that all of the bars and restaurants and hospitality venues, they're able to come and visit our site. And once they come to our site, they see what our process is and they can actually see that the lemons, limes and oranges are all getting squeezed here, where we're not using a concentrate that comes from overseas. What is really special is that we invite people to come here. We have events here, and we're a family business, and we're able to really just work off the foundations that my grandfather built many years ago and continue a quality product range.
For more information, go to eastcoastbeverages.com.au.
I'd like to acknowledge Australia's First Nation people as the traditional custodians of the land, and for this episode in particular, the Kaurna people. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging.
I always say in winemaking, and it's like anything, if you want to do it well, is this kind of culmination of lots of little 1%. You know, when you start getting into this pursuit of excellence, you start just dialing in all these little things.
This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Peter Fraser is the winemaker and driving force behind Yangarra Estate Vineyard. Located in Blewitt Springs, Yangarra's wines have set the benchmark for quality and their translation of sight within McLaren Vale. The reputation of their fine wines extends far beyond Australia, and I have to say I'm pretty chuffed to have Peter join me today. Good morning, Peter. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Shanteh. It's so nice to be on here and talk about Yangarra and the wines, and it's always a pleasure.
Well, you're not going to get out of it without talking all about yourself, so let's start there.
That's the hard part.
It's all right. I'll get it out of you. I did hear that you're maybe coming up to your 40th harvest. Is that right?
It would be probably very close. I did my first harvest in 1995, and just thinking about, there's a Spanish one in 1999, and then I did about 6 harvests in the US. So there's an extra 7. So yeah, it might be over 40.
Holy moly, that's a long time dedicated to the grape.
It is. It's funny though, all those international ones early in my career, and some of the most memorable ones I think are the ones when we were building the new winery in 2010 and trying to finish it. I remember one in 1998 we were doing it where I was previously working. We were doing a renovation and nothing was finished, and the winery was doubling in size, and the grape and the vintage was early. And it's just that constant kind of, advice to a young winemaker is like, be ready for the chaos and making it work within the chaos.
Definitely. I mean, I think if you can't think on your feet and you can't kind of be able to be flexible and, kind of agile, this probably isn't the game for you. But let's go a bit back to where you grew up and what kind of childhood did you have?
I kind of had a relatively suburban childhood in the kind of Adelaide Hills, and I was always a very outdoor child. I was in the creek catching frogs and tadpoles and always covered in mud. And then my mum married a chicken farmer in McLaren Vale, and at the same time I was always fairly heavily involved in horses and rode a lot of my life, and that kind of gave me a real kind of eye-opening to agriculture and animals. I'd say as a kid, I was hell-bent on potentially being a vet. I'm the worst academic. I was not great at school. Maybe I'm a little bit fast-paced and had trouble concentrating at school, and probably follows me to this day. And so, you know, ended up going down the agricultural path, and then in amongst that, had a bit of a left turn that nearly didn't come back. I joined the Ready Reserve while I was at university and in the Army, and ended up graduating as a infantry officer, and was kind of at a crossroad that I might actually go down a military career. And glad I didn't. In some ways, although the kind of thrill seeker in me kind of secretly probably had some ambitions in that realm. But it gave me a lot of organisation and kind of confidence when I finally finished my winemaking degree, that I kind of hit the ground running from a kind of the stuff that you don't learn at university, of like how to kind of put a team together and kind of chase kind of the detail that you need to do in this business.
It's funny, isn't it, the more I think about kind of the people I get to chat to on this podcast, and they talk about schooling, whether or not, but time and time again, I hear that, you know, the rigid school system, you know, just didn't play very well for them. And yet I talk to so many people that are so highly intelligent and have found their niche, and yet, you know, just perhaps didn't perform as well in, like you said, sitting your bum on a seat and studying for a long time. And so it's interesting to hear kind of that story, because I think for a lot of people it's nice to hear that, like, just because you perhaps, you know, aren't really, like you said, really great at that scholastic element of study, which is really quite niche, to sit down and to just really pump out hours of study is pretty hard to do. I certainly don't love it. But I want to know a little bit, first of all, going back to your mum marrying a chicken farmer, is that something, can you eat chicken now? Were you turned off them from that process of seeing anything like that, or do you love chickens?
I'll tell you a very funny story that happened about 10 years ago. In my regenerative kind of agriculture kind of obsession, I went to a Joel Salatin seminar in Daylesford in Victoria for a week to learn about kind of how we could kind of use regenerative farming that didn't apply to vineyards in our systems. And anyway, I met a guy there, and we decided we would be partners together, and we would grow meat chickens in the vineyard. And this is quite a long story, so I'm going to keep it very short. But ultimately, we built a special little trailer to take these chickens around to, you know, scratch around under the vines, and so we and I remember the baby chickens that got shipped in a like boxes that come from Queensland, air freighted. Anyway, it was like, you know, they're like $4 or $5 each when they're babies, and then you just feed them and just pray to God that the foxes don't get them, or, you know, nothing kind of happens to them. And was maybe the most stressful 12 weeks of my life ever. And it also happened to be nearly an early harvest. It must have been 15, because it was a really early harvest, and it caught me kind of by surprise. And it was just chaos. So I was growing these meat chickens with this guy, and anyway, it was somewhat a disaster. Well, we made it, and we actually sold the chickens, and we made a nice little profit, but they didn't actually roam or do the stuff in the vineyard that we'd hoped. And he said, "Oh, look, I'm just going to grow eggs." And when I say my stepdad was a chicken farmer, he was an egg farmer. And I was like, I collected so many eggs and shoveled so much chicken shit in my life that I was like, I'm just not doing eggs. Turns out he's actually started like a whole new free-range chicken business that is killing it, and I could have been a partner, but I'm not. Anyway, so I'm still just making wine and I am not in chickens, but we did have I still would love to. There's a breed of chickens that I actually recently just found out that have just come to Australia called the breast chicken from France. And there is a small group that are farming them. That is very exciting because one of the troubles in that world is that we don't actually, because of the quarantine laws in Australia, it's very hard to get those kind of amazing bred chickens versus the kind of I shouldn't say steroid, the chickens that are that grow very quickly and very efficiently that are maybe a little less flavoursome.
I bet there's so many more people that should talk on this rather than me. But I did hear that, when the breasts were coming over, and I spoke to a chef about it, and he was saying, it's going to take years, just like vines, for them to get established, to acclimatise here, to get their DNA and their everything up to scratch before these breast chickens are going to be tasty and great. So you're better off putting your money into some of the heritage breeds we have right now. And then it's interesting when you think that too. It's like, of course, yeah, they don't just come over here and just flourish. Like, it takes time, and just like new cuttings, it's like there's got to be trial and error, and everything needs to be worked out over time. But it's quite fascinating, the parallels within that. I do want to know a little bit about your time with the Army Reserves, because like you said, discipline, respect, all the things that go into dealing with people and like you said, creating teams. What were, do you think, the major takeaways from that experience that you still use today?
I think communication's probably one of the biggest things. Like, when you're kind of in your early 20s, you don't get much chance to public speak. And when you're a 20-year-old infantry officer, you've theoretically got 30 people that work for you, and you're giving them lessons, you're directing what they do on a daily basis. When you're doing those exercises, you're presenting constantly under pressure from directing staff and being assessed to everything you do. So you're working under pressure. But you're constantly, giving presentations and taught public speaking effectively. And I think one of those things that you kind of young winemakers, often it's also, I think, so much about how they can connect with the customers and their generally, whether that be at cellar door or whether that be in the trade or whether it be in a media side of things. And so that side of it. And then, look, I would say that things have changed a lot too. Like, the one thing it teaches you is to be kind of like, there's a very strong, people kind of think of military and it's all discipline, but a lot of the officer training is about thinking and being kind of free, not free thinking, but being able to make an appreciation of a problem and not just following a set of rules in terms of thinking outside the square, because I was and I love the tactical part of it because it ended up winning the tactics prize. But I kind of even think about that as at every vintage. Like, you've got a whole set of scenarios that are different every year. And if you've just got a recipe with wine, you're kind of probably going to come up short. And you've got to be adaptive every time, and you've got to be creative and innovative to kind of come up with a strategy that's going to get the best out of that particular year. And so you've kind of got your basis of what you do, but from that, it's about kind of being able to get the best out of it. And the best out of the people around you, for them to have the same level of passion and kind of excitement that you have for it.
Yeah, I know a few people in outdoor leadership, and it sounds very similar. And like you said, thinking for yourself, thinking through the problems, making decisions that affect other people, all that problem solving. I think there's so many wonderful things about being with a group of people, like-minded, having to be organised and, following some rules. I like kind of all of what that represents. But I believe that the regiment officers also drank a bit of wine. So did that, what did you think about that?
and I think that kind of started from agriculture into wine. And I actually... I have to be careful telling Warren Randall this, who's the owner of Seppeltsfield and many other vineyards. I met him at a wine dinner and in Adelaide, and the next day I was up there doing pump overs for nothing. And I would say that was a pivotal moment. I kind of realised that I could be a part of this, and he's an incredibly charismatic person, and I remember him turning up to the dinner in shorts. It was during harvest, in his rugby shorts and his hard yakka shirt. And I was like, I want to be that guy. I want to wear shorts, be able to come to a formal dinner in shorts and be able to talk about what I've made. And so that was a very much a pivotal moment to be like, hey, I could do this. And then when I went up there the next day, and did a few weekends, it was kind of like that's the moment. And from there, I had a great kind of time at university working in cellar doors in McLaren Vale, and kind of, I think, and all that kind of time at uni where you're just drinking bottles of wine that's scratching. So I don't know where you get the money to get these wines, but somehow you're drinking great bottles of wine and getting enthused about it all.
I love that that's like such a turning point, such a moment that you can recall so vividly as well. And it makes sense in terms of the fact that you loved animals, you loved agriculture, you had an affinity for the outdoors, and then you could kind of work in, hey, I can maybe do some of this, but I could take it in this direction, which I think is fascinating. You went on to work at Woodstock and St Hallett and Normans. We can't run through all of them, but tell me kind of what were some of the biggest kind of learning curves and, the biggest takeaways from your time over those years, those formative years?
It was really interesting. I remember I was fortunate enough to get kind of either just cocky or I had an idea of what I could do, and I didn't have any fear. I remember doing wild ferment Adelaide Hills Chardonnay in 1998, and I was like, I'm going to whole bunch press it and do all these things, and everybody was like, wow, that was amazing. And not use sulfur on the juice, and everything I'd learned at uni was reductive. So right from those early stages, I kind of wanted to push boundaries and be creative. And funnily enough, I also made I remember when we the third vintage, I was making Grenache from what is now Yangarra, and the 2000 harvest. And there was a bit too much fertiliser on the vineyard. There was a bigger crop, and it was a really rainy harvest. And the botrytis just took off. And I would say at that stage of my career, I didn't really have as anywhere near the kind of connection to the vineyard that I have now. And basically, we were harvesting it, and I don't think the vineyard manager probably had the kind of connection or understanding of Grenache and its kind of frailty to botrytis in a wet year. And anyway, everything we brought in had was botrytis affected and ended up being lacazed and was basically garbage that had to be heat treated and basically renegated to sub $10 wines into kind of potentially probably cask wine. But it's funny with making mistakes that the things that I learnt through those periods, like you're like, wow, okay, that's what that happens. I must not have been listening in that lecture. It definitely over that period. I remember also being very fortunate to be at Norman's, had some Victorian vineyards they purchased and a bottling line in Victoria, so I was able to be an associate at Melbourne Wine Show back when it was kind of the associate. There was only one associate per group, and it was those days of the Jimmy Watson when it was kind of just a barrel sample just to effectively, and they're super double oaked and super big powerful wines, but an amazing group of judges, and the stewards had to pour all the wine. Sorry, the associates had to pour and taste, but not talk, and their scores were not really any use as they are today, or they were, but it was just the way it was. You were kind of didn't have a very big voice, but it was amazing just in that period to work, to taste with some of the greats and get kind of to see where I was. Very different styles back then, but the whole kind of process of having confidence in your belief or what you saw was a great wine. And again, just probably that building the teams and having a group of people that all you could kind of have the same level of work ethic, passion, kind of drive to get where you wanted to get. So good. I mean, I love asking about people's first memories like that, just because, you think, oh yeah, you were an associate at one point, people told you to shush, don't shush, speak. Yeah. Just watch and listen. I remember getting told because I was pretty, I thought I was pretty good. It was like, your time is actually to just be quiet. So funny. But I want to know a little bit, you went over to Spain and you spent some time in La Mancha. I want to hear a bit about your experience with bush finds over there, and your first impressions in general of going into this vast expanse of wine in Spain. Yeah, it was mind-blowing. I was like, oh my God, look at all these vineyards. And so I was kind of had in my head, this is how we're going to do it. This is a really good example of like what you would do in Australia that you then think, okay, well, I'll just take what I do here and I'll translate it into the winery and that I was kind of asked to consult to, which is crazy in itself. So I would have been 25, and the cultural side of things, like the winemakers would smoke while they were blending. The lab was just like a sea of smoke. We would go for coffees, which meant having brandy and brandy in our coffee, wine with sparkling water at 10 o'clock. That was like mind-blowing. I felt so strung out, and then we'd finish work at 7 or 8 o'clock, and then I'd like maybe eat at 9, get to bed at midnight, be back up at 6 in the morning. It was madness. Back to the kind of vineyard. So I went out to these vineyards and I was like, oh my God, that fruit looks amazing. We should wait for a couple of weeks before that's ready. I think because my job was being paid by a UK importer who was basically trying to make, I suppose, fresh, modern Australian wines out of Spain that probably looked a bit Australian, but from the resource of Spain. And so I was like, I had my brief pretty clear. And so I was like, well, I need to pick it all at kind of, relatively even sugars at ripe. We need to get it in, ferment, to all the kind of just general winemaking stuff. But that it wasn't possible. Well, then I realised, and then I was like, why is it coming in? Why is it now just coming in? And it was like, because the family, there's only 4 people in the family, and they would actually have to pick. It was very peasant style, the way they ran their vineyards. And so 4 people were picking, and they would start at like 10 by May and finish at 17 by May, because that was the only logistical way to do it. And so I'd gone and seen all these wonderful vineyards, but there was just no physical way that I could change the cultural part of how they kind of picked. You would get a few more grapes on the weekends because the family members would come from Madrid and come and help them pick and stuff like that. And there obviously wasn't the margin for them to be able to justify paying somebody. And so it was very subsistence style kind of farming. And then the grapes would so I basically used to just sit at the weighbridge, and I would check the loads of grapes and measure the sugars and taste the grapes. So I would taste them in the trailer that came on the tractor. Generally, most of it came in on just a trailer, because they would pick a trailer at a time and bring it into the winery. And then I would just segregate them into my batches, and I would just keep topping up a fermenter as it came in. And then by the end of it, I remember the Spanish, the owners and the winemakers, they were like, but these wines are too strong because we would use these to fix everything else. So by segregating, they couldn't quite understand it, but eventually, the UK importer and the supermarkets that were wanting to buy those wines were like in love with these wines. So it was a really fun, but I had to do a complete reverse thinking, just to, again, adapt to what could be done within the culture that was there.
Yeah. And that's what's so cool almost. I mean, not necessarily for the final product of the wine, but for just, I think, like anything, any travel, right? You've got to adjust to where you are and who these people are and why they are like they are. And you've got to completely throw out what you think and absorb. It's awesome.
Yeah. And it was so much fun. Like I developed a lot of bad habits while I was there. But it was hilarious because I was literally probably the only English-speaking person in the town where there was lots of pictures drawn. I was like a novelty in this small town, and it was a fabulous experience.
Oh my gosh, I would like to have a few more drinks with you and dive into more about that whole experience. But tell me, 2001. Tell me about when Jess and Barbara entered your life, and tell me about the birth of Jackson Family Wines in your life.
Yeah, so I was actually in kind of mid to late 2000, and they were very keen to do something in Australia. They sent a whole bunch of people out and to kind of look at what they were going to do in Australia. And anyway, I think in the short of it, it's that they had tasted through all these wines and met a bunch of winemakers, and I later found out that I was amongst some very senior, kind of very established winemakers that were kind of in the running to kind of head up this Australian thing. And I think they chose the young dude because they didn't have really that many runs on the board yet, because they could manipulate especially the winemaker from the US was like, well, he'll do what I say, versus the more established will kind of be a bit harder to get along with. But
if only they knew who you
if
were.
only they knew, exactly. Because at that time, in their naivety, was like, we've got all the expertise and we'll train you how to make great wine. And sure, and they, in their thinking at the time, that these were wines that would be primarily for the US market, and so I was enamored by the opportunity to that. I didn't probably think about it like I do now. If I reflect back on that model was probably fraught with danger in the marketplace. That great wines around the world are revered in their homeland first before they become successes internationally, no matter how great the reputation of the producer might be in its homeland. So it wasn't until the GFC in 2008 where Australian wine just got absolutely destroyed in the US market that basically for Yangarra to survive, I basically needed to make it work in Australia. And so everything we did from that moment on was about getting the best out of, it becoming revered here in Australia. And with that came a level of autonomy and somewhat I was like, this isn't going to work if we're managing it from the US. And in that meantime, the part of the opportunity so I kind of just and back to your first part of the question, just really connected with the family and their kind of desire. Jess is probably still the most amazing man I've ever met. He had so much vision. You were exhausted if you'd spent 24 hours with him in terms of his visionary. I remember taking him around the vineyard and talking about how great Grenache was. And he was like, well, we should just plant the whole place to Grenache. And I was like, whoa, Grenache is not that popular yet. I don't know what we would do with it all if we did that. But he's so visionary. That was in 2004. And I just remember after I left a dinner meeting with him that night, I was awake for 3 hours because my brain was just buzzing with his kind of intensity. So, I was that time. It actually started then. He was a bit like, we need to build you a winery that you can make, world-class wines and kind of, he kind of just, everything I wanted to do, he just absorbed, distilled it into kind of an executable kind of vision. It was phenomenal. And Barbara Banke, his wife, is equally amazing. She has always just had so much trust and vision for us to be able to kind of steer into, the Grenache territory that we did very early on, planting young plantings of Bushvine Grenache in 2006. And just generally, the stuff that we've been able to do in the winemaking side with ceramic eggs and et cetera, we've had such phenomenal opportunities.
Yes, certainly, and you can see that through kind of everything that Jackson Family Wines is involved in, that vision and that ability to see talent and foster it. Tell me a little bit about the Yangarra site.
I remember when Normans first purchased the vineyard in 1998. I remember walking through the old vine. At that time, there was a little over 17 hectares of the 1946 Grenache. And I was like, I get to make this. And at that time, Clarendon Hills was at lofty heights, and they had a Kangarilla Grenache, which was from the site, which is effectively what Pysands is today. And so I always knew from that early days that block was something special. And it just kind of, I don't know, for whatever, it's a bizarre thing. I remember being so enamoured with the Grenache right from the beginning. And at that time, Charles Wish at Rosemount was kind of the other kind of stalwart of Grenache from the region. Rosemount's GSM, won everything from wine shows in those days, and they were a big purchaser of grapes. I was like, I get to play in this. And so that was super exciting. Interestingly, we'd won some big awards in London with Cabernet. So a lot of the vineyard got planted to Cabernet, which we kind of changed out. Cabernet in sand produces a nice style of Cabernet. I wouldn't call it a very international style. It tends to be more red fruited, a little more aromatic. So that there's no Cabernet on the property anymore. But it just being, and actually one of the exciting parts were, at the time, Michael Lane was the assistant vineyard manager in those early days, and we ended up having a 27-year partnership with the vineyard. And the other part of the vineyard, over that time, I moved to the vineyard when Norman's purchased it in 98. So I'd lived there for pretty much the whole time until 2019 that I moved out with my wife and bought our family house. So it was very much, the vineyard was part of my life. I rode my horses around the vineyard and had them there, and just part of me as a person nearly. But I lived right next door to the Smart family. Bernard Smart's been talked about a lot. He's been involved in three three wine of the years, holiday wine of the years now, with the recent their Clarendon vineyard, and he planted with his brother David and father Frederick the Yangarra Old Vine Grenache, and still have his wife Mary and Wayne still live kind of on a little subdivided block at Yangarra. And so living next door to them, just, he would be constantly walking the blocks, and they would bake me cakes and just sit out there having a cup of tea and talking Grenache and his love, and him telling me beautiful stories of, the Italian families and how they kind of, the tenacity that they had to kind of keep farming it when it was basically only the Italian families that bought the grapes to make garage wine. So just beautiful history and story and connection.
Incredible. 17 hectares, now 82 hectares under vine and over 170 hectares of land. Tell me a little bit about working with Michael Lane over the last 27 years and your understanding of that place. I mean, just like you said, 27 years of working with these incredible special sites. I believe an anniversary for 27 years is a sculpture. So you might be due for buying a beautiful sculpture to say thank you. But tell me a little bit about, just your understanding of that place.
It's funny. He's just retired, and so we bought him a travel-esque, as in a travel fridge for his travelling around Australia. So that's his sculpture. So he's got nice cold beer for travelling around Australia with.
Sounds very useful. I'm sure he loves it.
Yes.
Very Australian.
Yes, exactly. But working with Michael, there was just, I would drive him crazy. I'm kind of have lots of crazy ideas, quite funny. Like 6 months later, I'd be like, have you done that, Michael? He's like, no, I haven't done that.
That's a terrible idea.
He had just this lovely way of I'll just leave that one. But he also, if I asked him multiple times, we would often, do these things. We ended up just nearly, he would say to me, I think such and such ready, because we'd just done it for so long that there was a lot of communication that wasn't even necessary anymore, because we just kind of, for the most part, knew how each other were going to kind of see it. But also kind of be able to be preemptive. I remember 23, such a year. I remember 2011 was super wet, and Michael and I just were somewhat devastated because there was a lot of disease, and we worked huge hours together in a very near winery, and we had all the wonderful sorting equipment, and probably made the wines that turned people's heads, because I always feel like it's the bad vintages that you get to make a mark, because in the good vintages everybody's making good wine, and the lesser ones is actually when you can stand up and be counted and or be noticed when you're trying to kind of make your mark amongst more well-established or historical properties or winemakers. And so that moment with Michael and I and our teamwork and the team, I think really kind of was a turning point for the vineyard. And then and again we had like this really cold, wet harvest of 23, and like the purity and elegance and just the execution of those wines just came down to us just having the vineyard so dialed in that we had like a 4-day window to pick all our Grenache before 50 mils of rain, and we nailed it. And we kind of both came away and was like, that wasn't an accident. That was somewhat set up to succeed, if that makes sense. And it probably might not have come together so well if we hadn't have had all those years of practice.
Yep. Yeah, it's certainly a silver lining to look at, but I really like the way that you've put that in terms of approaching some of those vintages as a challenge, and like you said, all that work, you're not out there, converting things to biodynamics and doing all that work if it's not for those really tough years where it buys you a bit of time or whatever it may be. So I totally get that. In terms of winemaking, I know that you're somebody that isn't afraid to try things and change and adapt. In terms of Grenache in particular, would you say the biggest winemaking changes have just been the use of different vessels over time, or have you had a major change in terms of how you've kind of picked Grenache, or what would you say in terms of your approach?
Some of it has been slow and gradual. I think there has been a greater and greater appreciation for fragrance and elegance and purity. And so I think if we'd made those wines in 2005 or, pre-2010, they might not have been very well understood. And so there's been a gradual process in terms of picking earlier, we've always had somewhat of a challenge of picking too early at Yangarra because we have very low pH. There's the site in, for example, 2022, 2015, 2025. If we get some heat spikes where the sugars can jump up, we can be picking at kind of Riesling pHs, sometimes below 3, just a bit over 3. And that is kind of tricky to deal with because you don't want to hang them out too long to get into those kind of jammy or raisin or what a dark black fruited kind of characters. Because the beauty of Grenache is that beautiful red opulence of Grenache. That's what, why it does so well in those kind of tastings for Halliday in a group or at, wine shows, recently winning Wollongong 100 at the National Wine Show and Thistledown and recently because of that beautiful fragrance and opulence. And you can miss that if you're leaving it too long, but you also don't want to have green or, the wine being too acidic. So it's kind of one of those things of dialing in. And then I think this kind of lack of oak and this purity, although interesting, like there's some kind of school of thought too, like we've been using thick stave puncheons, Austrian oak, that really reduce the amount of oxygen impact on to Grenache. But what we're finding is they kind of allow the wine to breathe enough that you get this kind of call this saturated fruit that we see in high sands. And that really generous without being cloying. It's still beautiful, tight and fragrant and together. That needs some of that. And I think so some of these are just, I always say in winemaking, and it's like anything, if you want to do it well, is this kind of culmination of lots of little 1%. When you start getting into this pursuit of excellence, you start just dialing in all these little things. And so all these little trials, and if you're taking note, you can say, well, oh, wow, that worked, or that didn't work, and then just able to really dial in. I think when we were blending the 24s last year, it was like 75 little individual parcels. You just start to see every little nuance. And then in 2013, we started using ceramic egg, and all of a sudden we're like, oh, and we started messing around with extended maceration. The 21 old vine Grenache was the first Grenache for the old vine Grenache that we started kind of emulating what we'd done with Overtelly, but in stainless steel tank for the larger volume of the Grenache that went into the old vine, which ended up winning us Wine of the Year. And it was awesome, all these little things that started to culminate in these additions of little successes that we had with the purity and the expression of it.
I love hearing about the journey it goes on, because you're exactly right. It's not one or two things. It's 1 degree here, 1 degree there, and lots of decisions that are important that go into kind of where you get to make these beautiful wines. I got to have a peep at the 24 Old Vine, which is spectacular.
Yeah, it's a wonderful vintage.
The aromatic, but it's funny with Grenache because the aromatics can be so seductive. Getting that palate right. If you let it go a little bit too long, you get sometimes these really sappy, confected. Like I feel Grenache is such a challenge to get right, to still have line and length and a lovely tannin profile. It's such a detailed wine, and that's why I love it. Do you think, in your personal opinion, are we making the best Grenache in the world?
Yes. I think consistently across, I've spent a fortune chasing the old world Grenaches, California, South Africa, and there's some wonderful stuff going on. And I think consistently we are just, seeing such phenomenal consistency. There's a list of 10 producers that are all doing something different, but they're all really compelling wines in our region at least. And there'd be at least 10 producers that I could go to a restaurant, and if those Grenaches were on a wine list, I'd without a doubt buy those wines. And I think that's when you really start to, and they're relatively affordable in terms of, they're not, everyday pricing, but, if you put them in comparative, they're probably half the price of what we would pay for a Chardonnay de Pap here in Australia, and about half the price of the top tier, Sierra Grados, Priorat Grenaches from Spain. And so that's pretty phenomenal.
Totally. I'm just nodding away here because I couldn't agree more. For consistency, for price point, for the spread of producers and styles, I think we're making the best Grenache. I totally agree with you because it's apples and oranges, right? You look at Sierra de Gredos, you look at Priorat, you're like, well, that's equally an amazing wine from that place. But when you look at dollar figure, challenging vintages against epic vintages, we just have so much to offer. And like you said, at the price point is ridiculous. So
we're also hitting a freshness and a purity that I don't think the old world have quite got their head around yet. They're still a bit there. It's funny, Australian wines used to get criticised for being, too ripe, or, I would say in Grenache, we're actually, or too primary, too fruity, and we're like producing these really fresh. I had a Chardonnay yesterday, and it was 15.5% alcohol, and it was pretty heady, and it was a beautiful wine. It was very Chardonnay de Pap, but it, compared to the kind of, I think our Grenaches and they're getting compared to Pinot Noir and Nebbiolo because of this kind of refinement that we've been able to get without them being underripe. So It's exciting.
It's so exciting. Exactly. The chiseled detail, the facets that you can see, you can't stop naming descriptors and talking about them because there's just so much to sit there with. And it's never been more an exciting time. Pete, I do want to know a bit about your palate. If you're going to have 3 drinks for the rest of your life, what are they going to be?
Well, the first one is I have a fetish for Italian lager.
Really?
There's a which has probably stemmed from Peroni, but often I think imported beer can be a bit stale by the time you get to it. And there was a Pirate Life made a beer called Italiano that was based around that kind of recipe, I believe, and it was just divine. But they kind of go in and out of making it. I wish they would, because I would just, that would be the only beer I'd ever drink. So that's kind of my
I'll tag them in this, and maybe that might.
Yeah, exactly. I don't worry, I've written to them. That's
so
how
good.
strongly I feel about it. And the other one is probably, is a wine, is my kind of decadence. I just think that Chateau Yquem is kind of the most amazing wine in the world. It always blows me away. I don't really like sweet wine, and it doesn't even taste sweet to a degree. Like, it's just the most, I could just, if I could drink Yquem all day long, I probably nearly would. I think it's incredible. And how it's made and the like that kind of detail side of things is just nuts. And then I was a bit of tossing up because it got edged out. Krug was nearly on my number 3 champagne, but it got edged out too, and it would be very mad to hear what edged it out, and it's a margarita. Because if I think about...
Jesus. Olivia Krug. Oh, poor Olivia.
Sorry. Because if I think about all the greatest times I've ever had, it's drinking tequila. All the things I probably ever regretted as well.
Wow. Well, look, you know what? I wouldn't have picked maybe the beer, but I probably wouldn't have picked any of those, and I'm really pleasantly surprised. After all, beverages and having a drink is all about a good time, so you're just a good time guy, aren't you?
Yeah, exactly.
I love it. Well,
yes,
I have loved...
Here's to all the trouble that tequila has ever caused everybody.
That's for sure. It certainly ups the ante, and yeah, it is certainly one of my drinks of choice too. So, Peter, I've loved getting to know you a little bit more, to hearing a little bit more. We could do this for hours. I don't even think I got through half some of the questions about your wines that I wanted to touch on. We didn't touch on any of some of the single sites, so we might have to do this again sometime, but I am such a huge fan. It was really nice to see you recently, and keep on keeping on, and I hope that we do get to sink a couple of margaritas sometime together.
Sounds great. Thank you, Shanteh.
Thank you. This is Over a Glass. I'm Shanteh Wale. Stay tuned for more stories from the world of wine and drinks. Listen in every Thursday on your podcast app. Follow us on Instagram at overaglasspod and contact us at overaglass@deepintheweeds.com.au.